Hello, everyone, in the English Drill Zone, and welcome to another episode of English Fluency Journey. I'm your host, Michael, and today we have a very practical and useful topic for all our listeners who are looking to improve their English-speaking skills.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah, and I'm really excited to be here today. As an English language instructor, I've seen many students struggle with everyday conversations, especially when it comes to shopping and handling transactions.
That's absolutely right, Sarah. Many language learners can understand English quite well, but when it comes to actually speaking in real-life situations like shopping, they freeze up or struggle to find the right words.
Exactly, Michael, and that's completely normal. Even advanced learners sometimes find themselves searching for the right phrase in these situations. That's why today we're focusing on practical, everyday English phrases that you can use while shopping or handling any kind of transaction.
I love how practical this is going to be. So, Sarah, before we dive into specific phrases, could you explain to our listeners why these everyday conversations are so important for language learners?
Of course, shopping conversations are perfect practice for language learners for several reasons. First, they're universal. No matter where you go in the world, the basic structure of shopping interactions is similar. Second, they're brief but meaningful exchanges that follow predictable patterns, making them easier to master. And finally, they're immediately useful in real life.
That makes perfect sense. I remember when I was learning Spanish, being able to successfully navigate a store was one of my first big confidence boosters.
That's a great point about confidence, Michael. Successfully completing even a simple transaction in another language gives you such a sense of accomplishment. And confidence is key to fluency.
So let's help our listeners build that confidence. What's the best way to approach learning these phrases?
I recommend the listen and repeat method. It's a classic technique, but it works incredibly well. When you hear a native speaker say a phrase and then immediately repeat it yourself, you're training both your ear and your speech muscles. It helps with pronunciation, intonation, and rhythm, all essential elements of natural-sounding speech.
I've heard about this method. It's like shadowing, right?
Yes, it's similar to shadowing, but even more straightforward. With listen and repeat, you don't need to search for someone to shadow. It's ready-made practice. And when you repeat phrases aloud, they stick better in your memory because you're actively using the language, not just passively hearing it.
That makes a lot of sense. It's also a low-pressure way to practice, which I think many of our listeners will appreciate.
Absolutely. You can practice as much as you need in private until you feel comfortable. It's a safe space to improve without the anxiety of immediate real-world conversations.
So shall we start with some basic shopping phrases that our listeners can practice?
Let's do it. I'll say each phrase, and listeners can repeat after me. Let's start with the most common question when shopping. How much is this?
How much is this? Simple, but essential. What if I need a different size?
Then you'd ask, do you have this in a different size? Or more politely, excuse me, do you have this in a different size?
Perfect. And if I want to try something on?
You'd say, can I try this on? And if you need to find the fitting rooms, excuse me, where can I find the fitting rooms?
These are great starting points. Now, what about when it's time to pay? What are some useful phrases for that part of the transaction?
Good question. You might need to ask, do you accept credit cards? Or do you take cash? These are simple but important questions, especially when traveling internationally where payment methods can vary.
And everyone loves a good deal, right? How would I ask about discounts?
Good question. You might need to ask, do you accept credit cards? Or do you take cash? These are simple but important questions, especially when traveling internationally where payment methods can vary.
I've also heard people ask, is this on sale? Is that correct?
Yes, that's a very common phrase. Is this on sale? Is a perfect way to ask if an item is being sold at a reduced price.
Now, what if I need a receipt for my purchase?
Simply say, "Can I get a receipt, please?" Always good to add please to make your request more polite.
Let's talk about returns and exchanges. These can be tricky situations even in your native language.
They certainly can. If you need to return something, you would say, "I'd like to return this item." For exchanges, "Can I exchange this item?" Or more specifically, "Can I exchange this for a different size?"
And it's always good to know the store's policies beforehand, right?
Absolutely. You can ask, "Could you please tell me what your return policy is?" Another important question might be, "Is there a warranty on this product?"
These are all so useful, Sarah. What about gift-related phrases? Those come up often during holiday seasons.
For gift related questions, you might ask, "Is there a fee for gift wrapping?" Or make a request, "Can you gift wrap this for me, please?"
Perfect. Now, finding your way around a store can sometimes be challenging. What phrases would help with that?
If you're looking for a specific section, you could ask, "Excuse me, where can I find the electronics section?" You can replace electronics with any department you're looking for.
What if the item I want isn't on the shelf?
Then you might ask, "Do you have this in stock?" If they don't, you could follow up with, "Can I order this online?" Or, "When will this item be back in stock?"
Let's talk about delivery options. What phrases would be helpful there?
You might want to ask, "Is there a delivery charge?" Or, "Do you offer home delivery?" And to plan your schedule, how long does delivery take? For larger items, you might need to know, "Do you provide installation services?"
These are all excellent phrases, Sarah. What about general store information?
Common questions include, "What are your store hours?" If you have a serious issue, you might need to say, "Can I see the manager, please?" And if you need assistance, "Where can I find the customer service desk?"
I think we've covered most of the essential shopping phrases now. But Sarah, could you share some tips on how our listeners can practice these effectively?
I'd be happy to. First, I recommend practicing these phrases regularly, ideally daily. Start by listening and repeating each phrase several times until it feels natural. Then try to use them in role play scenarios. You can practice with a friend or even alone by imagining different shopping situations.
That's great advice. And I imagine pronunciation is important too?
Absolutely. Pay special attention to intonation, the rise and fall of your voice. Questions in English typically have a rising intonation at the end. For example, "How much is this?" has a rising tone on this. Also, focus on word stress. In "Do you accept credit cards?" the stress is on accept and credit.
Would you recommend recording yourself practicing these phrases?
That's an excellent suggestion, Michael. Recording yourself and then listening back is incredibly helpful. You can compare your pronunciation with native speakers and identify areas for improvement. Most smartphones have a voice recorder app that makes this easy to do.
I've also found that watching shopping scenes in English movies or TV shows can be helpful. You get to see these phrases used in context.
That's a wonderful tip. Seeing the phrases used in realistic situations helps you understand not just what to say, but when and how to say it. Plus, you pick up on body language and other cultural aspects of shopping interactions.
Speaking of cultural aspects, are there any cultural differences our international listeners should be aware of when shopping in English-speaking countries?
Great question. In many English speaking countries, especially the US and Canada, customer service is very important, and shop assistants are usually quite friendly and helpful. Don't be surprised if they ask, "How are you today?" When you enter a store, it's just a greeting, not a deep inquiry about your well being.
And tipping practices vary too, right?
Yes, tipping practices definitely vary. In restaurants in the US, tipping 15 to 20% is customary, while in the UK and Australia, it's less expected. For other services like hair salons or taxis, practices differ as well. It's always good to research tipping customs before traveling.
Another cultural difference I've noticed is how direct you can be when haggling or asking for discounts. In some countries, bargaining is expected, while in others, prices are fixed.
That's an important point. In most major retail stores in countries like the US, UK, Australia, and Canada, prices are fixed and haggling isn't customary. However, at markets, small independent shops, or when buying big ticket items like cars or appliances, there might be some room for negotiation.
So our listeners should adjust their expectations and approach depending on where they're shopping.
Exactly. Cultural awareness is part of language fluency. Understanding these unwritten rules helps you navigate shopping situations more confidently.
Now, Sarah, I'm curious. What's the most common mistake you see English learners make in shopping situations?
The most common mistake I see is learners trying to translate directly from their native language word for word, which often doesn't work because of different sentence structures and idioms. For example, in some languages, you might literally say, "For me, this object," but in English, we say, "I would like this."
That's a great point. And I imagine being too formal or too informal could also be an issue.
Absolutely. Finding the right level of formality can be tricky. In most everyday shopping situations in English speaking countries, a polite but conversational tone works best. Adding words like please and thank you is always appropriate, but you don't need extremely formal language in most stores.
What about when things go wrong? Let's say you receive the wrong item, or there's an issue with your purchase. How would you handle that in English?
That's when politeness becomes even more important. You might say, "I'm sorry, but there seems to be a problem with my purchase." Then explain the issue clearly. "I ordered the blue shirt, but I received a red one." Always stay calm and polite, even if you're frustrated.
And I suppose it's good to know phrases for resolving such issues.
Definitely. Phrases like, "What can we do to resolve this?" Or, "I would appreciate if you could," are polite ways to seek a solution. If you need to escalate the matter, "Could I speak to a manager about this issue, please?"
These are all such valuable phrases and insights, Sarah. I think our listeners will find them incredibly useful in real-life situations.
I hope so, Michael. Remember, everyone, the key to improving your English speaking skills is consistent practice. Start with these simple shopping phrases. Practice them regularly using the listen and repeat method, and soon they'll become second nature.
And don't be afraid to make mistakes. Every language learner makes them, and they're an essential part of the learning process.
Exactly. Each conversation is an opportunity to learn and improve. The more you practice, the more confident you'll become.
Before we wrap up, Sarah, do you have any final advice for our listeners who want to improve their English-speaking fluency?
My final advice would be to immerse yourself in the language as much as possible. Listen to English podcasts like this one, watch English movies and TV shows, read English books and articles, and most importantly, practice speaking whenever you can. Language learning is a journey, not a destination, so enjoy the process.
That's wonderful advice, Sarah. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. I'm sure our listeners have gained valuable insights and practical phrases they can start using right away.
It's been my pleasure, Michael. I've enjoyed our conversation and hope it helps our listeners feel more confident in their English speaking abilities, especially in shopping situations.
To all our listeners, thank you for joining us today on English Fluency Journey. Remember to practice these phrases regularly, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast channel for more helpful English learning content. Until next time, keep practicing and happy shopping.
Goodbye, everyone, and happy learning.
Goodbye.